Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis and as always, I'm your host. Alright, it's going to be a long episode. We have so many reviews, so many comics, and yet another special Halloween blowout review. And I can't wait to get that one because it's going to be kind of a wild one. So let's just get on with it. We only have one big news topic this week, which is that apparently Sony is continuing to go full steam ahead with their plans to develop a live-action Spider-Verse movie. Now this is something that I'm still pretty skeptical about, but now it seems to have caught the attention of news outlets like Variety and Hollywood Reporter, so I've decided to be more cautious and just say there might be a kernel of truth to it. The latest rumor is that apparently both Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire are in talks, and it might have even signed on to the movie, along with some involvement by Raimi himself. Which is kind of insane. I don't know if I'd believe it, but Sony has been known to do crazy things. If true, then I feel like it's just going to go into the same amount of problems that DC's plans for their Flash movie have been through, in that it's really going to ruin the unique nature of what this franchise can do for cheap and easy nostalgia bucks and shock and awe dollars. And from the looks of it, that's the reception that these new rumors have. Some are feeling this can be overstuffed mess, and others are really happy about seeing the characters return. And honestly, I'm going to side with the former. There really is no need for all this when the main central character of Tom Holland's Spider-Man hasn't even really been developed to the point where this would be interesting to see him bounce off or integrate with other versions. It just seems like an ill-advised cash grab. Either way, fingers crossed there's bound to be something good. Now let's move on to what I read this week because it's a doozy of a week. Let's start off with Rorschach #1, which is the brand new endeavor by Tom King, and another instance of me indulging in some literary self-harm, because this was damn bad, and I knew it was going to be, but I just thought that maybe something more low-key, something more grounded, more street level, but bring forth a better, more engaging Tom King. But no such luck. It's basically the same level of bland and dull nothingness that he's been putting out with his recent Strange Adventures maxi series. All style, no substance, and with a tone as tepid and lukewarm as tap water. Except this one is somewhat even more lacking because they even have the small luxury of a genre cliche-laden flashback subplot done by Doc Shaner. I mean, that isn't enough to save Strange Adventures, but it does add some professional, shallow, memorable thing to the experience of reading that. Rorschach #1 is just monotonous. I struggle to even explain it. It's just bog standard 70s detective noir thriller cliche beats, but with no anchor, no reference, and with no actual draw or pull. So seeing these characters just walk around and do the same old tired routines is uninteresting to the point of boredom. I guess the main hook here is meant to be that it's in the Watchmen universe, but that doesn't make it inherently interesting all by itself. It's passé at this point, and if that's the main thing you hope to inspire interest with, then it's a house of cards that's about to fall down. So the only really unique beats that King brings to the table in order to play with the Watchmen franchise's meta-commentary qualities is that he's made some of the backdrop of the plot concern what is apparently a conspiracy of comic creators, from Otto Binder to Frank Miller, and even fucking Steve Ditko. Which is funny because the fake Rorschach who sets off the plot of the story turns out to be that Steve Ditko. And the big cliffhanger tease is that it turns out that Steve Ditko might have been the real Rorschach from the original Watchmen. Ooh, isn't that clever and really smart? Wow, like that's so deep and intelligent. Now let's break it down because it is clearly King trying to do something really clever with how Rorschach was inspired by Ditko, his objectivist philosophies, and his works like Mr. A, which are all about that kind of stuff. But by doing something like this, he ends up being really reductionist of the man. I mean, King is no stranger to oversimplifying shit when he's trying to be complex, but this was a real human being. So when the big reveal about Ditko and the main issue relies really, really hard on the conception that Ditko was a reclusive, misanthropic hermit, and we're tying him to Rorschach, who was a giant piece of shit in the comic, and only just a few months ago, a relative of Ditko went on social media to refute this impression because it's fucking baloney according to them, then it all falls apart. Then you just become just another really bad, really shallow Watchmen imitator. A work that thinks pulling out comic tropes and names out of a hat and inserting them willy-nilly into the story somehow makes it this commentary and exploration of the medium. And mind you, that's the only thing the issue brings to the table. Something that is false or really misguided or really warped and not at all actually thought out. So it's basically just another Tom King joint, and probably on par with HBO's Watchmen series because that had a lot of the same problems. Overall, it's too boring to even discuss and too backward to really even dissect. So 2 thumbs down. Moving ahead, we go on to Strange Adventures #6. I already said my piece about this in previous reviews and even above in my Rorschach one. So yeah, it's still boring, still doing nothing, and it's still saying nothing. Well, that's not true. This one is actually even a bit more blunt about how this is all a big allegory for Tom King's CIA career and how he doesn't feel like he regrets that at all. Or maybe he does regret it. It's very wafting on that part. Oh, and also introduces a really backward and wannabe deep characterization of Mr. Terrific, where it turns out that he isn't sad his unborn child died, and he was kinda happy it did. But what else do you expect from a guy who took a drug PSA superhero and had him say, "I was on drugs the whole time"? as if that was some sort of deep shit. 2 thumbs down. Next up, we have Baitor versus Darkseid, and it's going to be just a small review because it's just a short bit in DC's Halloween anthology this year titled The Doomed and the Damned. And for a short bit, it's pretty good. I haven't read Ennis since the first 2 issues of The Boys, Dear Becky, and I was wafting on that because it felt like a very Comicsgate tinged screed, and I dropped it during the big Dynamite Comicsgate scandal a few months back. But this short feature makes the case for why Ennis still kinda rocks. It's a fun excursion back to the land of Hitman in Section 8, where Darkseid is basically blackmailed by the crew at Noonan's into participating into a drink-off with Baitor while they record everything for posterity. It's ludicrous, it's frenzied, and it's wonderful in the way that only Ennis's later days Section 8 stories can be. I won't say it feels like a proper epilogue or return to that world, but it is a fun detour. It reminded me so much of All-Star Section 8, especially the Madcap running gag of Batman looking racist, or even the rapping Etrigan and Phantom Stranger set piece. He has that style of entertaining loose humor that just goes the extra mile with each panel. I mean, seeing him getting hassled into the drinking contest by hacking in the bar drunks, funny. Seeing him getting hassled by the entire bar, even a bit more funny. Suddenly out of nowhere, Batman hassling about it, great. The entirety of the pits on Apocalypse hassling him for it, perfection. Overall, I hope to see more, and it's nice just to go back to that world and just revel in it. So overall, 2 thumbs up just for this short beat. And next up, we have Immortal Hulk number 38, and we are down to the last 12 issues of the series. And damn, does that start with an aplomb. While I still think the series is having a bit of an issue with decompression at times, especially in the time it takes for the characters to really complete any actions, and relying more on character dialogue within a scene to really fill out the entire issue, not even I can deny that this one is at least a landmark release. It's exciting, and it creates a line in the sand that truly marks it as the beginning of the end, as the start of the final chapter, because it pulls out a few tricks that can only really work once, and it's crossing that threshold with blockbuster appeal. We're finally getting the characters all on the same page, they're getting pushed to the brink, getting pushed back, and some are even pushing back. It's the last stand against the leader in the making, even if we, the readers, know it's not quite there yet. But yeah, overall the issue is brisk. I mean, again, it seems to literally span a minute in universe. But now, as always, the appeal of the Immortal Hulk stems from how Ewing is able to bring forth a lot of unexpected and impactful intricacies into the Hulk's mythology, and stuff like Devil Hulk being based on Paradise Lost and such is just wonderful. It just adds something, and even stuff that Ewing didn't exactly create but is extrapolating are furthered and deepened. Like how Savage Hulk has always been well established as being based on Bruce as a child, but seeing him in his Banner form as a cowering 3-year-old is, well, it's heartbreaking, but it adds such a depth of emotion to the character and to the series that it's incredible. So yeah, seeing the big showdown between Devil Hulk and Leader is getting me hyped, as it's also putting the pieces in place for an even bigger finale. 2 thumbs up, can't wait for the next one. And finally, we have Exoswords Chapter 6 through 8, Hellions, New Mutants, and Cable. And yes, this is the 3rd round of Exoswords issues, and this one was an incredible week, because it was basically everything last week wasn't. It was fun, it was engaging, it was slightly thrilling, but it also had really great little character undercurrents too. Unlike last week, which was this overbearing, Wolverine-laden, dragging mess, this week really fills out the storyline and beats of Exoswords. We get to see more of how the world of X-Men is reacting to the tournament, what different schemes are being hatched, how it's affecting several individuals, and how seriously, or not seriously, people are taking these things. But it never draws away from the impact of the issues as individual issues. Sure, Hellions is heavily tied to Exoswords, but it's able to balance that out with humor, wit, and really increasing the tension and conflict within the dynamics of the group itself. Pulling them into this high-stakes event in a vital subplot kind of makes the series finally what it always should have been, and it's the best issue to date. And having Mr. Sinister right in the middle of the action is inspired because he goes off like fireworks with everyone else. New Mutants, on the other hand, is a slower, more focused character piece, like last week's issue of Storm, but this time it's about Doug and Warlock and how everyone is 100% sure that he is going to die. It's a great somber look into Doug's insecurities and fears, but it's also about his courage and his adamancy of fulfilling what only he feels he can do without putting others at risk. It's classic underdog stuff. And sure, he might die. He will very likely die. But having an issue like this just goes to show how much of his all he's giving this entire endeavor. He's not backing down, and he's putting everything he can into it. And that matters because it'll make his eventual death all that much more impactful. And kudos. Cable's issue is mostly a one-and-done Event Horizon-style space horror adventure for the Summers family, and it's mostly just there to set up plot beats for the upcoming Sword ongoing. but it's still really good and tense, and even its more light-hearted moments, like at the end where it merges with the Exoswords event promptly, are undercut with seriousness, like this dread-inducing little button for the previous chapter's Doug plot. So yeah, it's a really great week that was entertaining and thrilling and substantial, and it's everything that further weeks of Exoswords should be like. So fingers crossed, and overall, 2 thumbs up for everything across the board. And anyway, I'm going to let Fargo Season 4 stack. I'm still going to be reviewing it on this podcast, but I'm going to just let it, reach along a little bit more before I talk about it, because I'm going to be mostly talking about it from a fourth-world perspective, and that might be a little difficult, just doing it episode by episode. So we're going to move past that and head on straight into this week's special Halloween review, because we just have the winner of our second poll of the month, Dylan Dog Dead of Night, starring Brandon Roof and Sam Huntington. And let me just get it out of the way, I'm really not that familiar with this character. I mean, I'm aware of Dylan Dog, I'm aware of his popularity and the popularity of his creator, Tiziano Sclavi, but I've never really done a deep dive into the series properly, and so that will impact my reading of the movie somewhat. But I'm gonna guess not by a lot, because from what I've seen and what I've learned, the original comics are episodic European horror detective satire, and the movie, for instance, kind of throws that all out the window. So I'm gonna deduct 2 points off my eventual score for this off the bat, just to keep things even, because honestly, the movie throws out all the unique qualities of source material and replaces it with some of the most generic and cliched genre clash noir action adventure beats that I've ever seen. And what I mean by genre clash noir is that certain subset of media that wants to do a detective noir story but wants it to be fun and wacky, so they throw in a completely unrelated genre to keep things fresh and zany. Stuff like Anonymous Rex, which is meant to be like a Philip Marlowe airport novel throwback, mashed up with dinosaurs, or that HBO TV movie Cast a Deadly Spell, which is a pulpy two-fisted detective story, but with fantasy horror elements, that kind of thing. And Dylan Dog Dead of Night is no different. It kind of slots directly into that framework. And that's a shame, because it makes it fit into the background, because there's so many other stories and books and movies that have done all that to the point where there's nothing really memorable or interesting about it at all anymore. Dylan Dog Dead of Night has the same weary narration, femme fatale, gangland conflict, secret double dealing stuff, but made comedic and goofy by having Ruth explain that it's werewolf gangs, zombie muggers, and ghoul junkies. It's just not enough to make it stand out. And that's kind of the main flaw with this, because you've seen one of these stories, then you've seen them all. And that makes whenever this movie retreads those same beats a groan-worthy experience. But in all honesty, that's really the worst it gets. On its own, it's just decently mediocre. Like, it's not a god-awful watching experience for someone who really likes this kind of genre mashup. Roof is perfectly fine as a pretty boy, but still kind of sullen and dour private eye for the monsters. And even if it follows the same path as dozens of others, it's still entertaining on a base level to see that play out. Like when Dylan has to shake down informants at a morgue, or intimidate a local zombie mob boss, or even go undercover as the most obvious snark into a gangland vampire club. And I'm serious about that last one. He goes undercover as a ghoul junkie, and his only disguise is pulling up his sleeves and putting on a beanie. It's hilarious. And just to admit it, Sam Huntington as Dylan's sidekick slash gopher, who is incidentally turned into a zombie and suffers the side effects throughout the movie, is well played, if generically screechy and animated comic relief. There's a good bit where he's starving himself for most of the runtime that garnered a solid chuckle from me. And since people who are probably more familiar with the comic will wonder this, Dylan's friend slash compatriot in the comics, Groucho, gets a small reference as a costume worn by Dylan in the opening credits. So, that's about it. And, that's kind of what the movie as a whole is. It's soft and comfy and unassuming and unambitious, and it's the definition of turn your mind off. But here's where it gets a little bit interesting. It's also the most wannabe Constantine ripoff movie I've ever seen. Yes, because I'm saving that for the last bit here. It's basically the one movie that tried really hard to cash in on the Keanu Reeves Constantine movie, with kind of having that same tone around Dylan and the plot, and Huntington's character basically being Shia LaBeouf's version of Chaz. And they even try to top it by toning everything even further down than that movie did. This is basically the version of the Constantine movie that was made to be watched on Nick at Night or ABC Primetime. The plot is just so sterile that it's not even worth mentioning. It's just not offensively bad or mind-numbingly dumb, but it's secondary to the movie's focus, which was on the tone and being fun and being adventurous. But it's not really doing all those things that great either. Overall, it's a decent rainy day watch if you're bored, but I mostly recommend to folks who have never even heard of the comics, because then moments like Dylan expositing for 2 whole minutes about how he's the chosen one probably won't seem as aggravating, because again, I'm not that familiar with the comics, but even that made me want to, just lay my head down because it's just so tired. Overall, 2 months middle and a 6 out of 10. Anyway, that's it for this week's episode. I just want to say thank you to everyone who voted in this week's Halloween blowout poll and picked Dylan Dog the other night. That review was all your fault. But I really appreciate it, and I'm so glad we got so many votes. And, I hope that review did anything for you. And if you watch it, you'll probably see why it was so hard to recap, because it just flies by. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's ever sent in a question, comment, or topic. Like I said, I'm be focusing on the Halloween reviews, so I don't really have time for that. But thank you so much anyway, and thank you to everyone out there who's ever listened and who is still listening. That means a lot as well, and I really appreciate that, and I'm really humbled by that. So just, thank you so much. I'm going to give a shout out to the cover artists at DOTEMCE. Please check them out. They're amazing and deserve all the traction they can get. I just want to say have a great week, and see you again next time.